Chosen one, before I say anything else, I want to acknowledge something. You have been faithful in ways that no one gave you credit for, in quiet rooms, in invisible moments, in seasons where doing the right thing cost you something real, and the only witness was the weight you carried alone afterward. I see that. And more importantly, what I am about to tell you is that something far greater than my seeing was watching. Here is the truth about the season you have been living. It was not random difficulty. It was a deliberate examination, designed not to defeat you, but to discover what you are genuinely made of, beneath the performance, beneath the strategy, beneath everything you show the world. And the passing criteria was never perfection. It was never flawless. It was this: when the outcome you were trusting for did not arrive on time, who did you choose to be? You chose faithfully, repeatedly, in small, invisible ways that are now written in a record far more permanent than anyone around you knows. The test is complete. The verdict has been rendered. You passed. Completely. And the season that is now beginning was only made possible by the one you just survived. Stay with me. I want to begin by locating you. Not generally, specifically. I want to find you exactly where you are. You have been in a season that does not have a clean name. A season where you did everything right and still watched the results fall short. Where you showed up faithfully to your prayers, to your responsibilities, to the relationships that were costing you more than they were giving, and still felt like you were standing in place. Where you gave your best effort to things that mattered deeply to you, and the return did not come. And in the middle of all of that, you watched other people move. You watched others receive what you had been believing for. You watched doors open for people who seemed less prepared, less sincere, less committed than you. And somewhere in that watching, a question started forming. A quiet, dangerous question, not loud enough to be a crisis, just persistent enough to wear you down. Is this even working? You tried not to voice it. You tried to believe through it. But the question stayed, and it brought friends with it. Am I doing something wrong? Did I miss something? Am I forgotten? You carried those questions into rooms where no one knew you were carrying them. You smiled in conversations where you were exhausted inside. You offered encouragement to others when you were running on almost nothing yourself. And in the rare moments when you were honest about what you were going through, you could see in people's faces that they did not have an answer that could hold the weight of it. So you stopped bringing it up. You learned to carry it alone. And that alone, carrying that specific kind of silent faithfulness, is exactly what I need to talk to you about today. Before I go any further, I want to tell you what is waiting for you at the end of this message. Because what I am about to walk you through is not a short encouragement. It is a full unveiling, and I want you to stay with me for all of it. By the time this message ends, you are going to understand exactly what the season you just came through was actually doing in you, and why it was designed the way it was. You are going to hear the specific things that God was watching for, and the specific markers that prove you passed. You are going to receive the names of who you have proven yourself to be. And at the very end, I am going to speak something directly over your life that I believe was the reason this message found you today. This is not a message to have in the background. Stay with it. All of it. What is waiting at the end is worth every minute. Now, let me show you what was really happening. Here is the first thing I need you to understand. The most significant tests in a person's life do not announce themselves. They do not come with labels. They do not arrive with a memo that says, "This is a divine examination. You have 60 days. Here is what you are being evaluated on." They come quietly. They come disguised. And that disguise is not an accident. It is the point. Think about it for a moment. If someone told you today, you are currently in a test of your character, and God is watching specifically whether you will respond to disappointment with bitterness or with grace, would you respond the same way you actually have been responding? Of course not. You would perform grace. You would manage the response. And the test would tell God nothing about who you actually are, because it would only be showing him who you can act like under observation. The test only works when you do not know it is a test. And so, the most important examinations of the soul are always wrapped in things that look like setbacks, things that look like mistakes, things that look like the universe is indifferent to your faithfulness, because that is the only condition under which your true character is visible. Consider the life of Joseph. You may know the story. A young man with a genuine calling, a sense of destiny on his life, sold by his own brothers, thrown into a pit, then pulled out and sold into slavery in a foreign country, then falsely accused, then thrown into prison. Not for weeks, for years. At no point in that process did God appear and say, "Joseph, this is preparation. You are being tested for palace-level assignment. 13 years. Stay the course." There was no announcement. There was only the daily choice of who Joseph would be in circumstances that gave him every reason to become someone else. Someone bitter, someone manipulative, someone who used people the way people had used him. And he did not. Not because the circumstances were easy, because something in him formed in the invisible years refused to become smaller than what he had been called to be. That is what a test looks like. It looks like your life right now. But here is what I need to show you next. Because most people, when they think about divine testing, assume God is watching for strength, for unshakable confidence, for never wavering, never doubting, never having a hard day. That is not what God watches. Let me tell you specifically what the divine record is actually keeping track of. Not your public moments, your private ones. God watches how you treat people who have no power to reward you for treating them well when no one who matters to your future is in the room. That is character without an audience. God watches how you respond to a closed door, the specific choice you make in the 5 minutes after the disappointment arrives, when resentment would be completely understandable and no one would judge you for it. Do you reach for bitterness, or do you reach for something deeper? God watches what you choose to believe in, the silent stretches, the weeks and months where no evidence is coming back that your faithfulness is being registered. The places where logic says the return is not coming. What do you reach for when logic says stop? And God watches whether your character expands or contracts under sustained pressure. Because some people, under enough pressure, become someone they were never meant to be. They shrink, they harden, they begin cutting corners in the places no one can see. And some people, under the same pressure, become more of who they actually are. More patient, more discerning, more certain of what they will and will not give away. God watches which direction you go, and I am standing here to tell you, He watched which direction you went. Through every one of those moments, the faithfulness in empty rooms, the integrity under pressure, the choices made when no reward was attached. There is a man in the book of Job who faced a stripping that went beyond any rational test. He lost everything, his possessions, his children, his health, and his friends, the ones who were supposed to comfort him, spent their time explaining to him what he must have done wrong to deserve it. But God's conversation about Job was not about what Job had done wrong, it was about who Job was. "Have you considered my servant Job?" God said. Not, "Have you seen his achievements? Have you seen his track record? Have you seen his performance metrics? Have you considered him who he is, in the core of him, when everything is stripped away?" That is the question God has been considering about you. And what the record shows, what was watched through every private moment, every invisible faithfulness, every choice to keep going, when the reasons to stop were louder than the reasons to continue, is something we are going to spend the rest of this message unpacking. Because what God found when He considered you is not what your hardest moments told you He would find. Stay with me, because what I am about to show you next is the part that changes everything. I need to show you the specific criteria, the actual passing markers, and I need to show you what your record says about each one. Because what I found when I went to look at those results is the reason this message exists. There is a word I want to bring you into, a word that is going to reframe everything you have been through. And once you hear it, really hear it, I believe you will never look at that season the same way again. The word is Doimos. It is a Greek word used in the ancient world to describe something that had been tested and found genuine. Not tested and found perfect. Not tested and found flawless. Tested and found real. And here is where this word comes from. In the ancient world, before modern banking, merchants who dealt in precious metals had a problem. Gold could be counterfeited. A skilled craftsman could mix cheaper metals into an alloy and coat it in such a way that it looked like pure gold to the naked eye. It was indistinguishable. The only way to know if the gold was real was to put it through conditions a counterfeit would not survive. Heat, pressure, the process of the refiner's fire. If what came out the other side was still gold, if it held its form, if it retained its value, if it did not crumble or corrode, then the word that was applied to it was Doimos, tested, and found genuine. That word did not mean the gold was without imperfection. It meant the gold was real. Now hear this carefully. God was not testing you to find a perfect chosen one. He was testing you to find a genuine one. And genuine is not found in success. Genuine is not found in the seasons when everything is going well and faith costs you nothing. Genuine is only revealed under fire, only revealed in the conditions where a counterfeit would have crumbled. A bank does not test a $100 bill by placing it in a museum. They test it by running it through the exact conditions a counterfeit would fail under. The friction, the scrutiny, the pressure of real use. And if it holds, if it is still what it claims to be on the other side of that process, then it is confirmed, genuine. You have been run through those conditions, the friction of prolonged waiting, the scrutiny of a season that gave you no reward for your faithfulness, the pressure of carrying things alone that you were never designed to carry alone. And what came out on the other side is what we are calling this today, Doimos, tested, found genuine, not barely genuine, not just enough to pass, genuine in the ways that matter most in your private choices, in your unseen faithfulness, in the direction you leaned when every pressure in your life was pushing you toward a different version of yourself. Now, I want to name for you the specific markers of this, because I want you to move past the feeling that you might be hearing what you want to hear. I want to give you something you can actually examine. Here are the 3 passing markers. Not 3 things you did perfectly. 3 directions you consistently chose. The first marker is this. You chose faithfulness when convenience was available. There were moments, the ones where the easier path was right there. The choice to compromise in a small way. The choice to not show up fully. The choice to protect yourself by giving a little less than what you knew was right. And in those moments, you did not take the easier path. Not always, not without it costing you something. But the consistent direction of your choices, the overall lean of your life in that season, was toward faithfulness, not convenience. The second marker. You chose integrity when compromise was invisible. This is the one that matters most to the divine record, because it reveals what a person is actually made of. Anyone can choose integrity when someone is watching. The test is what you do when no one is watching, when the compromise would be completely invisible, when you are the only one who would ever know. In those moments, the ones that never made it into any conversation, that you have never reported to anyone, you chose to remain who you actually are. And the third marker. You chose to remain open when bitterness was accessible. This is perhaps the hardest one, because bitterness is not always dramatic. It does not always announce itself as bitterness. Sometimes it arrives as a reasonable conclusion, as the obvious response to pain that was genuinely unjust, as protection, as self-preservation, and you had access to it, real access, and you consistently chose something else. Not perfectly, not without the temptation, but the direction of your choosing was away from bitterness and towards something that kept the door open in you and in your life. That is Doimos. That is the record. And when gold is confirmed genuine, when the Doimos stamp is applied, something changes about what it is available for. It is no longer in the testing chamber. It is ready to be trusted with what it was made for. What you were made for is not a small thing. And what is now being released into your life is the direct consequence of what was confirmed in that season. But before I tell you what is reorganizing, and I want to go into that carefully and specifically, I need to address something first. Something that I believe is relevant to how you are receiving all of this. Because here is what I have watched happen in the lives of chosen ones who have come through exactly what you have come through. Their spirit receives the truth, but their mind, the part of them that has been wired by months or years of hard season, by prolonged waiting, by the accumulated weight of unanswered prayer, their mind struggles to translate that truth into something they can actually live from. You may be experiencing that right now. Something in you recognizing what I am saying, wanting to receive it, and another part of you, a quieter, more exhausted part, still running the old calculations, still doing the math on your failures, still building the case that maybe this is not really for you. I want to talk about why that happens, because there is a real reason, and understanding it changes how you navigate this transition. When the human brain has been under sustained pressure for an extended period, the kind of pressure that comes from prolonged waiting seasons, from carrying weight alone, from months or years of high stress, low resolution, living the brain does something automatic. It locks into what neuroscientists call a survival frequency, a mode designed for managing threat, not for receiving transformation. In this mode, the brain's higher capacities, the parts responsible for insight, for integration, for the kind of deep reception that allows a new truth to actually land and change the way you move through the world, those capacities go quiet. Not because they are broken, because the brain is conserving them for what it believes is still an emergency. And the result is what many chosen ones describe as a gap, a frustrating, bewildering gap between knowing something is true and actually being able to live from that truth. You can hear a word, you can believe it intellectually, and still feel like it is not arriving somewhere deep enough to actually shift things. Here is what I want you to know about that gap. It is not a spiritual problem. It is not evidence of weak faith. It is a frequency problem, and frequency problems have frequency solutions. The research on this has been building for decades. The scientists who have studied it at institutions like MIT, Harvard, Stanford, what they have found is that the brain has a native state, a God-given brainwave pattern that every child is born operating in. The researchers call it the gamma state, and what they have documented about people when they are in gamma is remarkable. Heightened intuition, accelerated integration of new information, the kind of clarity and receptivity that allows deep truths to actually take root rather than slide off the surface. Dr. Robert Lake, a neuroscientist with 34 years of research, spent his career studying one question: why do some people move easily from breakthrough insight to lasting transformation, while others get stuck in the gap? What he found was that the difference was almost always frequency. The brain's ability to receive and integrate was directly tied to whether it was operating in a survival state or its native gamma state. And what the modern world does systematically, from childhood on, is suppress that native frequency, the chronic stress, the prolonged waiting, the sustained pressure. All of it is static on the line. All of it is the gap between your spirit knowing and your mind being able to receive. What Dr. Lake created after decades of research is what I would describe not as a product, but as a recalibration. A 7-minute audio technology that uses a process called brain entrainment to guide the brain back into its native gamma state. Not over months of practice, not through equipment that costs thousands of dollars. 7 minutes, headphones, eyes closed. That is all. Think of your mind like a radio that has been stuck on a static channel for a long time. The signal is there, the transmission is real, but the receiver is locked on the wrong frequency. What this recalibration does is simply turn the dial, so that what your spirit already knows can arrive somewhere deep enough to actually move you. I want to be honest with you. This is not a shortcut to God's timing. The test you passed that took what it took. The season you walked through was not bypassed by any technology, but what this recalibration can do is close the gap. The gap between receiving this message and being able to live from it. The gap between knowing the verdict and actually feeling the weight of it settle. For those whose spirit resonates with what I just described, the information for how to access this recalibration is in the pinned comment and in the description. I would ask you only to look at it if you genuinely feel led. The information is there when you are ready. And now let me show you what is reorganizing. When a chosen one is confirmed genuine, when the Doimos season has completed 3 specific areas of life begin to shift, not all at once, not without some disorientation, but with a consistency and a direction that becomes unmistakable once you know what you are looking at. I want to walk through each one carefully, because I want you to recognize what you are in when you are in it, so that you do not misread the transition as one more disappointment. The first area is your relationships. What is shifting? The people who were only compatible with the previous version of you, the one that was smaller, more accommodating, more willing to compress yourself to fit, they will begin to move. Some will leave in dramatic ways. Some will simply become distant. Some you will find yourself less and less willing to invest in without being able to fully explain why. I want you to know what that will feel like from the inside, because it is important that you do not misread it. It will feel like loss. It will feel, in some moments, like you are the one who changed, like you are the one who is pulling away, like maybe the problem is you. You will question whether you have become less compassionate, less loyal, less committed to the people in your life. Here is what I need you to hear in those moments. Do not try to hold what is releasing. Do not chase what is completing. Do not write long explanations or mount defenses for a transition that does not require your management. What is leaving because proximity requires resonance. And you have moved into a new frequency. And here is what to trust. Just when those exits begin to feel lonely, just when the silence feels like it might be the whole story, people who speak your language without requiring a translation will begin to appear. Aligned connections, relationships that feel effortless in a way that has nothing to do with ease, it has to do with alignment. People who see what you carry without needing it explained. That is not coincidence. That is reorganization. The second area is your purpose. What is shifting? The things you have been trying to build through effort and strategy and persistence alone, the doors you have been pushing on, some of them are going to begin opening through invitation rather than force, through being pulled rather than pushing, through opportunities that arrive from directions you were not monitoring. I want to name what this is going to feel like, because I have watched chosen ones fumble this transition. It is going to feel surreal. And then, almost immediately after surreal, it is going to feel terrifying, because the survival season trained you to earn every step forward, to justify every opportunity, to prove your worthiness before you accepted any advancement. And something is going to arrive that you did not earn in that way. And the voice is going to say, "This is a mistake. You are not ready for this." If they knew what you actually are, they would not be offering this. Hear me when I say, that voice is the residue of the testing season. It is still speaking the language of the chamber you just left. You are no longer in preparation. What is arriving is not calling you to prepare more. It is calling you to step into what you have already been prepared for. Do not shrink back into the preparation posture. The door that opens from invitation rather than effort is the most important door you will ever walk through. Walk through it. The third area is your provision. What is shifting? The channels through which resources, opportunities, and access arrive are about to look different. The doors you have been watching, the specific ones, the ones you had mapped out, the ones that made sense to you as the logical route to where you needed to go, may not be the ones that open. What is going to arrive will come through unexpected routes, through people you were not cultivating, through timing that makes no practical sense, through a yes in a season where logic said the answer would be no. And the temptation is going to be to disqualify what arrives because it does not match the shape of what you expected. To say, this cannot be it, because this is not how I thought it would come. Do not disqualify the provision because of the packaging. The source has more creative routes to your life than the single route you have been watching. What felt like rejection was actually selection. What felt like delay was actually development. What felt like being overlooked was actually being protected from exposure you were not yet ready to carry. What felt like unanswered prayer was actually the answer being assembled in rooms you did not yet have access to. That is not wishful thinking. That is mechanics. That is how the system works when gold has been tested and found genuine and cleared for display. Stay with me, because what I am about to show you next is the deepest thing, the thing that makes every piece of this make sense. And at the very end of this message, I am going to speak something directly over your life, something I believe the Spirit has placed on my heart, specifically for you. Do not leave before the end. I want to share something with you before we go deeper, because I believe it will help make what I am saying feel less like a concept and more like something you can actually hold. I know a chosen one. I will not use a name, who, 18 months ago, was facing what he described as a total professional collapse. A major contract he had built his livelihood around was cancelled without warning. The financial pressure that followed was not abstract. It was immediate, it was daily, and every logical route he could identify to rebuild was closed. In the middle of that, he made a decision that I have watched define chosen ones in their testing seasons. He decided he was not going to perform his way out of it. He was not going to post about it publicly, not going to manage the narrative, not going to be seen hustling his way back into visibility. He went quiet. He protected what was being built inside him. He showed up faithfully in the small rooms, his private commitments, his integrity in the unseen places, while the external picture looked like a prolonged failure. 40 days into that season, on a day that had no particular significance, a company he had never contacted reached him directly. Not through a connection he had worked, not through a door he had been monitoring. A company he did not know was watching him, and the opportunity they brought was not what he had lost. It was double what he had lost. He proved himself in the silence before he was promoted in public. I share that not as a formula. The path you are on is not identical to his path. But the pattern of what happens when a chosen one refuses to become someone else under pressure, when they protect the genuine thing inside them through the full weight of the test, that pattern is consistent. And I wanted you to have one concrete picture of it before we continue, because what I need to address now is the specific thing that will try to stop you from receiving what belongs to you. And I want to name it clearly, because it will not always arrive as doubt. Sometimes it arrives as something that sounds reasonable, something that sounds like discernment, something that, if you are not careful, you will mistake for wisdom. It is the voice that says, this is not really for you. Maybe not in those exact words, but you know the voice I mean. The one that begins building a case the moment something good arrives. The one that takes inventory of every failure, every inconsistency, every time you did not handle the test perfectly. The one that says, you prayed enough to count, but did you pray consistently enough? You showed up, but did you show up with enough faith? You chose integrity. But what about that time, that specific moment, when you did not? You know that voice. And here is what I need you to understand about it. That voice has been speaking the language of the testing chamber for so long that it does not know the season has changed. It learned to be useful to you during the examination. It kept you honest, kept you accountable, kept you from becoming someone careless about who you were. And those were not bad things. But that same voice turned inward in this new season. is no longer discernment, it is residue. It is a voice that was built for one season, speaking too loudly into another. And what makes it most dangerous is this: it uses your own values against you. It knows you care about integrity. It knows you take your responsibility before God seriously. It knows you are not someone who claims things lightly, and it weaponizes all of that. It says, a truly humble person would not receive this. A truly self-aware person would see all the reasons this cannot be for them. Hear me, that is not humility. That is the counterfeit of humility. Real humility does not refuse what God has given. Real humility receives with gratitude, not with argument. And the doubt, the quiet, persistent doubt that asks whether you are hearing what you want to hear instead of what is actually true. I want to address that directly as well, because doubt is not the enemy I am describing. Doubt, held rightly, is healthy. The kind of doubt I am naming is the kind that has become a reflex. The kind that activates automatically whenever something good arrives. The kind that never doubts the bad news, but always doubts the good. If your doubt is more skeptical of the blessing than it is of the burden that is not discernment, that is a trained response to a long season of disappointment, and it is time to retrain it. Now, I want to do something specific. I want to give you permission, and I mean that seriously. I want to speak permission over you, because I believe some of what has been keeping you from fully stepping into this season is the absence of someone simply telling you that you are allowed. You are allowed to outgrow the version of yourself that survived by making yourself small. You are allowed to stop apologizing for how much you have changed. You are allowed to receive what you did not earn through performance, because some things are given, not earned, and grace is the primary currency of this season. You are allowed to let the verdict stand without filing an appeal against yourself. You are allowed to stop building the case for why this cannot be true. You are allowed to release the habit of minimizing what God has confirmed. And you do not owe anyone an explanation for who you are becoming. If something in your spirit just shifted when you heard those words, if something in you recognized that you have been the one prosecuting yourself the hardest type, I release it in the comments. Let that be a moment of actual decision, not just a feeling. And before I show you the deepest thing, the thing that makes every piece of this land in a completely different way, I want to tell you something. At the end of this message, I am going to speak over your life, what I believe the Spirit has placed on my heart, specifically for you, not a general blessing. Something that corresponds directly to everything you have walked through. Stay with me through everything that comes next, because what is waiting at the close of this message is the reason it found you today. Now, let me show you the deepest truth, the one that recontextualizes everything above it. Here is what I have been building toward this entire time. Here is the thing I needed you to walk through everything above before you could fully receive. The level of the test was the announcement of the assignment. Sit with that for a moment before I explain it further. The level of the test was the announcement of the assignment. God does not over-prepare. He calibrates. When the divine intelligence designs an examination for a specific person, the difficulty of that examination is not arbitrary. It is proportional. It corresponds precisely to the weight of what that person is being trusted with. You do not receive a test that is harder than your assignment requires, because the preparation is the point, and the preparation is calibrated to the thing you are being prepared for. Which means this: if the test you have been through was this hard, if the season required this much of you, cost you this much, asked you to carry this specific weight for this long, then what you are being trusted with on the other side of it is not a small thing. Let me bring together everything we have covered, because I want you to see it as one complete picture. The first revelation: tests do not announce themselves, because the only way to find the genuine person, not the performance, not the managed version, is to find them when they do not know they are being watched. God needed to find the real you, not the you that shows up when there is a reward attached. The real you, and the real you could only be found in an unannounced test. The second revelation, Doimos, tested and found genuine, not tested and found perfect. God was not looking for a flawless chosen one, he was looking for a real one. And what the refiner's fire confirmed in you was not the absence of imperfection. It was the presence of something that does not crumble under sustained heat. Something real, something that holds. The third revelation, the reorganization. What is now happening in your relationships, your purpose, and your provision? It is not random. It is not coincidence. It is the natural consequence of genuine gold being cleared for display. When something has been tested and confirmed, it gets moved out of the testing chamber. It gets trusted with the assignment it was prepared for. All three revelations were saying the same thing. They were building toward this. What felt like rejection was actually selection. What felt like delay was actually development. What felt like being overlooked was actually being protected from exposure you were not yet ready to carry. What felt like silence from heaven was actually the answer being assembled in rooms you did not yet have access to. What felt like a season that was costing you everything was actually the season that was confirming you as the one who could be trusted with everything. And I hear the Father saying over you now, my child, I watched every moment of that season. I watched every choice you made in the rooms where no reward was coming. I watched what you reached for when the logical thing was to let go. I watched who you chose to be when becoming someone else would have been completely understandable. And what I found in you was not what fear told you I would find. What I found was gold. You passed. Not barely, not conditionally, perfectly. Not because you were flawless, because you were genuine. And the word over your life, from this moment forward, is not probation, it is promotion. Now let me give you something practical, because I want you to be able to recognize where you are, not just feel it, but know it as this new season begins to unfold. I want to walk you through what I call the passing mark framework. 3 specific markers that indicate you are genuinely in the transition I have been describing, and not simply hoping you are. The first marker is a peace that does not make sense to your circumstances. Not the absence of challenge, not the absence of uncertainty about the future, but a specific kind of quiet in your spirit, a settled quality that exists alongside the unresolved things. A peace that is not dependent on the situation being resolved. If you notice that in yourself, even in small moments, that is not denial, that is confirmation. The second marker is an appetite shift. The things that used to pull at you in the testing season, the need for validation from specific people, the compulsion to defend yourself against misunderstanding, the hunger for an explanation that would make the hard season make sense, you will notice those beginning to lose their grip. Not because you have forced yourself to let go, because something in you has genuinely moved on. The appetite has changed. When you notice that shift in yourself, that is not indifference. That is a sign that you are no longer operating from the same frequency. The third marker is a forward pull. Instead of your energy being primarily drawn backward into grief about what the waiting season cost you, you will begin to feel drawn towards something you cannot fully name yet. A direction, a door, a version of your life that is becoming more specific in your imagination rather than less. If you have been feeling that pull even quietly, even just as a whisper that is not wishful thinking, that is your spirit beginning to receive what your mind is still processing. If 2 of those 3 markers are present in you right now, this message is not an encouragement towards something future. It is a confirmation of something that has already happened. Now I want to name who you have proven yourself to be, not who you are aspiring to become, who you have already demonstrated yourself to be through everything this season required of you. The first is this: you are a spiritual warrior. And I want to be precise about what that means, because it is not what most people picture. A spiritual warrior is not someone who never feels fear. It is not someone who never has a hard day. A spiritual warrior is someone who held ground when the easier path was collapse. Someone who did not weaponize their pain against the people around them. Someone who did not let the battle make them cruel. That is you. The battle tried to make you into something smaller and harder and more defended, and you refused. That is a spiritual warrior. The second, you are a wounded healer. The specific places where you were most broken in this season, the cracks, the places where the pressure got through, those are not your weakness. They are the location of your greatest gift. You will not serve people from theory. You will serve them from having walked through. And there is no substitute for that. The people who need you most will need someone who has been in the place they are in and came out the other side, still believing. That is what you have become. The third, you are a cycle breaker. Something ends with you. It does not matter whether the pattern you are breaking is something you inherited, something you learned, something that has been in your family or your relational history for longer than you can name. It stops at you, not because you declared war on it, because you refused in the testing season, in the invisible moments, in the choices no one saw, you refused to pass it forward. That refusal is the most powerful inheritance you will ever give. The fourth, you are a seer. You have always perceived things that others could not fully name. You have always had a sensitivity to what is underneath the surface in situations, in relationships, in the direction things are moving. That gift was compressed in the testing season by the weight of survival. As the season shifts, the clarity returns, and this time, it returns with the wisdom of someone who has walked through the fire and has context that cannot be taught. And the fifth, you are a light bearer, not in a performance sense, not in the sense of managing how you are perceived. In the simplest and most profound sense, when you are present, something shifts in a room. Something becomes possible that was not possible before you arrived. That is not your personality. That is not your social skills. That is your calling in expression, and it has been in you this entire season, even when you could not feel it. These are not titles. They are testimonies. They are the names of what was found in you when the testing was complete. I want to give you one more thing before we close. Something that will serve you in the season that begins now. I want to walk you through what I call the witness protocol. Because one of the gifts that comes out of a season like yours is the ability to recognize what is actually happening when you are in it, so that you never again navigate a testing season without knowing what it is. The witness protocol is 3 questions, and I want to invite you to hold them as a practice, not just for future seasons, but for the decisions that are in front of you right now. The first question is this: is what I am being asked to lay down something I can afford to lose, or something that would compromise who I am? There is a difference between a sacrifice and a self-betrayal. Some things we are asked to release in seasons of growth that cost us something real but do not cost us ourselves. Other things people ask us to lay down: who we are, what we know to be true, the core of what we have been formed into. The witness protocol begins with learning to tell the difference. The second question: is my response to this situation forming character or just managing outcomes? Because there is a kind of response that is only about the external result, about getting the right outcome, avoiding the wrong one, managing how things look. And there is another kind of response that is happening at a different level entirely, that is actually building something in you, regardless of whether it changes the situation. When you are in the middle of something hard, this question helps you know what level you are operating at. And the third question, the most important one: would I make this same choice if I knew God was watching and no one else? Not if everyone was watching. If only God was watching. If the only opinion that would ever be registered was the one being kept in the divine record. If your answer to that question changes the choice, that is where the test actually lives. And now I want to do something with you. Not something physical. Something that happens right here, in the interior of who you are. I want you to bring to mind the hardest moment of your testing season. Not to dwell in it, not to feel the pain of it again, but to see it, the specific moment, the specific room, or the specific conversation, or the specific night where the weight was the heaviest. Let it come into focus in your mind. Now I want you to look at yourself in that moment, not with the eyes of the person who was suffering through it. Look at that moment with what you now know. Look at yourself standing in that place, carrying that weight, making those choices, holding on to something in the dark when there was no evidence that holding on was rational, and recognize what you are actually looking at. You are looking at someone who was being confirmed. You are looking at someone being found genuine. You are looking at someone the divine record was building a case for, not against. Let that recognition settle somewhere deeper than your thoughts. Not as an idea, as something that lands in you. And when it does, let it change the way you carry that memory. That memory is not a record of your hardest failure. It is the record of your proving. If that just arrived somewhere real in you, if something shifted in how you are holding that season type, I was being confirmed in the comments. Let that be the declaration that closes the old interpretation and opens the new one. Now, I want to say something before we close, because I think it matters. You are not alone in this. Right now, right at this moment, in places across the world you will never visit, in languages you do not speak, there are chosen ones going through this exact same transition. People who came through the same kind of invisible testing season. People who are arriving at the same realization you are arriving at. People who did not know they were being prepared and are now beginning to understand what they have been prepared for. You are part of something larger than your individual story, and the shift that is happening in you is not separate from the shift that is happening in them. There is a community of genuine ones who have been confirmed in the fire, and you belong to it. I want to give you one last practical tool before we close, because entering a new season requires protecting what is being built. And I want you to go into this with clarity about what is serving the season and what is not. I want to invite you to do what I call a frequency audit. Not a complicated process. 3 honest questions that you apply to the 3 categories of your life that most affect your frequency. For the people and environments in your life, the question is simply, when I leave this, do I feel more like myself or less like myself? Not more comfortable, not more entertained, more like myself. The people and environments that consistently leave you less like yourself, that drain the clarity you need to step into what is coming, those need to be protected against. Not dramatically, not with declarations or confrontations, simply by reducing access. For the conversations in your life, the question is this conversation building something or consuming something? There is a kind of conversation that leaves both people more alive, and there is a kind of conversation that is only about processing pain in circles, in ways that never arrive anywhere. As you enter this new season, you are going to need to be honest about which conversations you are participating in and whether they are aligned with where you are going. And for the interior spaces in your life, the thoughts you return to, the narratives you rehearse in private, the way you speak to yourself in the quiet moments, the question is the story I am telling myself about who I am keeping pace with, who I have been confirmed to be? Because the greatest misalignment I see in chosen ones entering a new season is not external. It is the gap between what heaven has confirmed and what they are still telling themselves in private. Close that gap. Let what was recorded about you in the divine record be the story you tell yourself in the quiet rooms. Now, let me close this the way it deserves to be closed, because what I am about to speak over your life is the reason this message found you today. Stay with me for every word of it. Father, we come to this moment with something we do not often bring into our prayers honestly. We come with the weight of a season that cost us more than we have fully admitted, even to you. We come with the accumulated quiet of months and years of carrying things that did not have names. We come with the tiredness that lives below the surface, the kind that sleep does not reach. We come not because we have everything together. We come because you have been watching, and we want to acknowledge that we know you have. Thank you. Not for the easy moments, for the invisible ones. Thank you for the presence you maintained in the rooms where no one else was present. Thank you for the record you kept when no one else was keeping one. Thank you for watching what we did in the dark and counting it, not discounting it, not setting it aside, not waiting for the more impressive version of us, counting it as it was, in the exact condition it was offered in. Thank you for not requiring us to be polished before you could call us genuine. And God, you see what has been carried. You see the weight that was not visible to the people closest to us. You see the questions that were held in the dark, the ones we were afraid to voice because we were not sure we could survive the silence that followed them. You see the mornings where getting up was a choice that cost something real. You see the conversations that were never had, the explanations that were never given, the things that were chosen in private that will never be known publicly. You see the faithfulness that had no audience and asked for none. You saw all of it. You witnessed it, and you did not look away. Now, there are some things that do not belong in the next season. Some things that were carried through the testing chamber that do not have permission to come out the other side. We are going to name them, and we are going to release them, not by willpower, by decision. Every story that told you you were not enough for what you were being called to release. Every comparison that measured your progress against someone else's timeline and found you behind, release. Every wound that convinced you the testing season was a punishment rather than a preparation, release. Every voice that said you should be further along by now, release. Every ceiling you inherited that was never actually yours to hold, release. Every version of yourself that survived by making itself smaller than it actually was, release. Every delay you interpreted as abandonment, release. Every unanswered prayer you converted into evidence that you were forgotten, release. It is done. It no longer has standing in your life. It does not have permission to follow you into what is next. And now we call forth. We do not beg. We do not ask timidly. We call forth with the authority of those who have been tested and found genuine, those who carry the Doimos stamp on their lives. We call forth the full expression of the spiritual warrior, the one who holds ground without becoming cruel, who carries the battle without letting the battle carry them. Come forth in this season, in full expression. We call forth the wounded healer, the one whose cracks are the exact shape of someone else's healing. Come forth with the medicine that only a life like this one could produce. We call forth the cycle breaker, the one who ends what was never meant to continue. The patterns stop here. The inheritance changes here. Come forth with the quiet authority of someone who has already decided. We call forth the seer, the clarity, the perception, the ability to see underneath the surface of things. Come forth now, without the compression of the testing season. Come forth with wisdom. We call forth the light bearer, the one whose presence changes what is possible in a room. Come forth, not as a performance, as a nature. And we call in the aligned connections, the relationships that are ready for this season, the people who speak your language, the divine appointments that were on hold until the confirmation was complete. We call them in now, the right doors, the right voices, the right rooms. Every door that was held shut by a version of yourself that did not yet know what you know, we open it now, and we cover what is rising. We cover the new season from premature exposure. We cover the gifts being activated from every force that would call them back into hiding. We cover what God is building from the hands of those who would diminish it before it is ready to be seen. What was just released does not have permission to return. What is being called forth does not have permission to be pulled back. What is being covered does not have permission to be uncovered before its time. And I hear the Father saying this over you now. My child, I watched every moment. I watched the invisible ones. I watched what you chose when no one else was watching. I watched what you held onto in the dark when logic said let go. And what I found in you, in the real you, beneath the performance and the management and the exhausted trying, what I found was not what your hardest season told you I would find. What I found was gold, Doimos, tested, real, genuine in the ways that matter most. You passed, not barely, perfectly, not because you were without flaw, because you were without compromise, in the things that define a person. And the season that begins now was only possible because of the season you just proved yourself in. The word over your life from this moment is not probation. It is not waiting. It is not almost. It is promotion. You are not a work in progress waiting to begin. You are a completed formation ready to be deployed. You are not invisible. You have been preserved. You are not forgotten. You have been confirmed. You are not who your hardest seasons said you were. You are who the divine record says you are. You are the chosen one, not as a title, as a testimony. Do not say your agreement yet. I want you to sit in what just happened. Let the weight of it arrive somewhere deeper than your thoughts. Let the truth that you have been seen, counted, and found genuine, let it settle somewhere in you that logic cannot argue with. There is a community of chosen ones who have come through exactly what you have come through. They are arriving at exactly what you are arriving at. Right now, in places you will never visit, in languages you will never speak, there are genuine ones stepping into the same new season you are stepping into. You are part of that. You are not alone in this. If you know someone who is in the middle of what you just came through, someone who has gone quiet, someone who seems to be carrying something they cannot fully name, someone who is still in the testing season without knowing that is what it is, share this message with them. Let your sharing be the moment they receive what you just received. And if what was spoken in this message found you at exactly the right moment, if this landed somewhere real, then what I want to say to you is simple. More is coming. This was not the only message placed on my heart for you. Stay connected to this space, because what comes next is going to build on everything we covered today. And now, let your agreement be the seal. It is done. It is settled. You receive it, not as wishful thinking, not as empty words, not as performance, as the truth about who you are and what you have already proven. And that is not coincidence, and that is not accident, and that is not random, and so it is. Amen. There is a test that most people never knew they were taking. No announcement, no schedule, no instructions handed to you at the door. Just life pressing in from every direction. Losses you didn't see coming, doors that closed when they should have opened, nights when you asked the ceiling if any of this was going somewhere, and mornings when you got up anyway. You took that test, and I need to tell you something that nobody has said to you clearly enough, in plain language, without conditions attached. You passed, not because you were perfect, not because you had it all figured out, but because you are still here, still searching, still willing to listen to something that might change the way you see everything that happened to you. That is not nothing. That is, according to neuroscience at the highest levels of research, one of the rarest signatures a human brain can produce. And in this video, I am going to show you exactly what that signature is, where it comes from, why the modern world has been systematically destroying it since you were 7 years old, and what happens when it gets turned back on. Because here is what I need you to understand before we go any further. God or the universe, or whatever word carries the most weight for you, does not react to perfection. Perfection is expected. Perfection is ordinary. What causes something beyond ordinary reaction? What causes, if I can use this word without you dismissing everything else I am about to say, what causes genuine divine astonishment is when someone who was supposed to break did not break. That is you. And the science of why that matters, the actual measurable biology of what your persistence has been doing inside your brain, without you knowing, is the most important thing you will hear today. Stay with me, because where this goes is not where you think it is going. There is something about you that you have known for a long time, but have never quite had the language for. You felt it as a child, that sense that the world was larger and more responsive than other people seemed to notice. You learned faster. You felt more. Your intuition picked up things that other people walked right past. There were moments that felt almost enchanted, like the universe was leaning in, paying attention specifically to you. And then, somewhere along the way, that feeling started to fade. Not all at once, gradually. The way a radio signal weakens as you drive further from the tower, you do not notice the exact moment it starts to break up. You just realize, at some point, that what you are hearing is mostly static. Most people accept the static. They tell themselves this is just what growing up feels like. They stop listening for the signal, but you never fully accepted it. And that inability to accept the static, that persistent, almost irrational conviction that there is supposed to be something more that is not a flaw in your psychology. That is evidence. Evidence of what, exactly, I will get to. But first I need to tell you about the test, because understanding the test changes everything. The test is not a single event. It is not a tragedy you survived or a failure you recovered from, though it may have included both of those things. The test is the accumulation. Every time life applied pressure and you did not permanently fold. Every time the voice that said give up was answered by a quieter voice that said not yet. Every time you got up, not because you were certain things would get better, but because something in you simply refused to stop. That is the test. And you have been passing it in real time, without knowing that anyone was watching. Here is what is interesting about that. In multiple research studies conducted at institutions including MIT, Princeton, and Stanford, neuroscientists examined the brain activity of individuals during and after periods of extreme sustained stress. What they found during the crisis was predictable, elevated cortisol, suppressed higher cognition, the classic stress response. But what they found after, specifically in people who pushed through without breaking, was not what they expected. One researcher, and I am paraphrasing his words here because they stayed with me when I first read them, said that the pattern they observed was, quote, almost embarrassingly consistent with what ancient spiritual traditions have described as grace. I want you to hold that for a moment, because we are going to come back to it. Before we go any further, I want to take 30 seconds to tell you what is waiting for you at the end of this video. Because if you leave early, you will miss the part that actually changes things. By the time this video ends, you are going to know the name of the specific brainwave that your childhood ran on, the one that made everything feel possible and learning feel effortless, and exactly what happened to it. You are going to hear the story of a neuroscientist who spent 34 years trying to solve this problem, and what he found. You are going to understand why everything you have tried before, the meditation, the self-help, the practices, did not produce what you were looking for, and why what I am about to share with you is mechanically different at the level of biology. And you are going to walk away from this video with a concrete next step that takes 7 minutes. That is what is waiting. Keep watching. You were a genius once. I do not mean that loosely. I mean it in the most precise neurological sense of that word. Every child is, for a brief window, operating at a level of brain function that most adults will never return to without significant intervention. The brain of a healthy child between the ages of 2 and 7 produces something that neuroscientists have spent decades trying to understand, measure, and replicate. It is called the gamma wave. At 40 cycles per second, the gamma wave is the fastest brain wave the human brain produces. It is associated with the integration of information across different regions of the brain simultaneously, which is why children in this state learn languages effortlessly, make creative connections that adults cannot see, and experience what researchers describe as flow state almost continuously. But gamma is not just about intelligence. That would be interesting enough on its own, but it would miss the larger picture. Gamma is also the brainwave most consistently linked to what researchers carefully call anomalous cognition, the ability to sense things before they happen, to know who is calling before you look at the phone, to make a decision that defies logic and turn out to be exactly right. The ancient world called this gift different names in different traditions. The Greeks called it nous. The Vedic tradition called it prajna. In the Abrahamic faiths, something close to it gets translated as wisdom, discernment. The still small voice. Modern neuroscience calls it gamma, and you were full of it. When you were 7 years old, you had more gamma activity than you will probably ever have again as an adult, unless something changes. You learned the way water moves, naturally, without effort, finding its own path. You trusted your instincts because your instincts were operating on a system that has not been fully replicated in any laboratory. So what happened? What happened is one of the most significant and least discussed findings in the field of cognitive neuroscience. The researchers who discovered it gave it a name that sounds almost gentle for something this consequential. They called it the decline effect. The decline effect begins around the age of 7. This is not a coincidence. This is precisely when formal education in most cultures around the world begins to systematically restructure how the brain processes information. The emphasis shifts from exploration to compliance, from intuition to instruction, from gamma to the slower, more manageable, more controllable beta wave. And here is where I want you to pay attention to something. A brain operating in beta is easier to predict, easier to direct, easier to sell to, easier to worry, easier to keep in a loop of mild anxiety that makes it reach for comfort and distraction rather than insight and creation. I am not saying this is a deliberate conspiracy. Most of the people involved in building these systems were doing what they believed was right. But the outcome, regardless of the intention, is a population of adults whose most powerful cognitive resource has been quietly, systematically switched off. Researchers at 6 major universities, MIT, Harvard, Stanford, Princeton, Berkeley, and Columbia, conducted longitudinal studies tracking gamma activity from childhood through adulthood. The findings were consistent across all studies. By the age of 30, fewer than 3% of adults maintained the gamma activity levels they had as children. 3%. Dr. Robert Lake, a neuroscientist with 34 years of experience studying brain entrainment and cognitive enhancement, whose research also produced the framework known as the Youthful Brain Protocol. Dr. Lake reviewed these findings in the early part of his career and said they changed the direction of everything he did afterward. Because the question they raised was not just what happened to gamma. The question was whether it could come back. I will tell you what he found. But first, I need you to understand something about why this hits people like you harder than it hits anyone else. The chosen one, and I am using this phrase not as flattery, but as a precise description of a specific type of person. The chosen one does not lose gamma the way an average person loses it. They lose more, because they started with more. The people who feel, in adulthood, that they are living dramatically below the level of their own potential, not just slightly underperforming, but profoundly separated from something they know should be accessible. These are almost always people who had exceptional gamma activity in childhood. The gap between who they were then and who they are now is wider than most people experience, because the starting point was higher. This explains something that you may have spent years trying to explain to yourself. It explains why you feel like you were built for something larger than what your current life contains. Why you sometimes experience flashes, moments of extraordinary clarity or intuition that turns out to be exactly right, or creative insight that comes from nowhere and then disappears just as quickly, and then the door closes again before you can hold it open. Why you have tried things that other people seem to find sufficient. The meditation apps, the journaling, the yoga, the retreats, and walked away feeling that you were close to something but never quite touching it. You were not close to something outside yourself. You were close to something inside yourself that has been waiting a very long time to be let back in. Consider for a moment a woman named Sarah. She is 43 years old, a teacher in Texas. For more than a decade, she had been pouring everything she had into helping other people grow. her students, her colleagues, her family. She described her own brain as a machine running at 30% capacity. She knew what it felt like to think clearly. She remembered it from her 20s, from her childhood, but the version of herself she was living with had become a dimmer, slower, more exhausted approximation of that. She said something that I have not been able to forget. She said, "I know there is more in here. I can feel the shape of it. I just cannot find the door." That is not a metaphor for ambition. That is a description of gamma. And the door she was looking for is real. It has a mechanism. And the mechanism is not what you have been told it is. Now, before I tell you about the mechanism, I want to plant something in your mind that you can carry through the rest of this video. There is a discovery that Dr. Robert Lake made not at the beginning of his career, but after 34 years of research, after ruling out everything that did not work consistently, after following the data to a place he did not expect it to go. He found something that does what all the other methods promised to do but could not deliver reliably. It does not require stillness. It does not require a 30-day program. It does not require you to believe anything. It requires 7 minutes. I will explain exactly what it is, how it works, and why it is different from everything else. But first, I need to tell you something about the test you have been taking, because there is a layer to this story that changes the meaning of everything that came before it. And the question I want you to sit with is this. If gamma is the signature of your highest self, if it is, as these researchers describe it, the God-given frequency that your brain was designed to operate on, what does it mean that yours never fully went away? What does it mean that you are still here, still searching, still asking the questions that most people gave up on? That question is the beginning of an answer that is going to take the rest of this video to fully land. Stay with me. Let me tell you what the researchers found in those studies at MIT and Princeton. Not the part about the decline effect, you already know that part now. The part that came after. The part that almost did not make it into the published findings because it was so unexpected that the research team spent months trying to find an alternative explanation before concluding that the data was simply what it was. They were studying brain activity in people who had gone through extended periods of severe stress, not a bad week, not a difficult year, but sustained, prolonged, life-altering pressure, financial collapse, loss, the kind of experiences that some people walk away from and some people do not walk away from intact. What they expected to find in the survivors, the people who had pushed through without breaking permanently, was elevated stress markers and depleted cognitive resources, the normal aftermath of a long fight. What they actually found, in a significant percentage of the subjects, was a gamma spike. Not just a return to baseline, a spike, higher than their pre-crisis measurements, as if the sustained pressure, rather than destroying the gamma signal, had done something closer to the opposite, had compressed it, and then, when the pressure released, the signal returned stronger than before. One member of the research team said, and this was in an informal comment, not in the published paper, but it circulated widely among people in the field, she said, "It looks like the brain has a way of protecting the most important things. Under enough pressure, it goes quiet everywhere else, but it holds on to this." She was talking about gamma. And here is what I want you to understand about that, in the context of your own life. Every period in your life, when things were hardest, when the pressure was highest, when you were most convinced that you were losing your brain, was doing something that you had no awareness of. It was protecting the signal. It was holding on to the frequency that you were born with. Not perfectly, not without cost, but it held. That is what passed the test. That is what God, or the universe, or whatever name you carry, for the force that is larger than any individual life, that is what caused the reaction that the title of this video is referring to. Not your achievements, not your credentials, not the moments when you had it all together, the moments when you did not have it together, and you held anyway. Think about one of those moments right now, not to relive the pain of it, but to locate it, to find the specific memory of a time when you had every reason to stop, and you did not stop. Do not analyze it. Just find it. Let it sit in your awareness like an object you are holding in your hand, because what I am about to tell you is going to change the meaning of that moment. The gamma spike that researchers observed in people who came through sustained pressure, it does not stay at its elevated level automatically. That is the part that nobody tells you. The spike happens. The signal is there. But if the brain does not have a way to access and maintain that elevated state, it sinks back down. Not all the way to where it was before the crisis, but far enough that the window closes. The door that you can feel the shape of goes quiet again. This is why the people who go through the hardest experiences do not automatically become their greatest selves. The potential is there. The gamma signature is actually stronger than it was, but without the right conditions, it cannot be accessed. And this is exactly where every method you have tried runs into its structural limitation. Meditation works on the principle that if you create enough mental stillness, the brain will eventually find its way to the elevated state on its own. And for some people, after months or years of daily practice, that is true. But the brain does not do this reliably. It does not do it quickly, and it certainly does not do it on the timeline of a life that is already in motion, with responsibilities and relationships, and a mind that has been trained for 30 or 40 years to operate in beta. The retreat worked while you were there. The app worked for the first few days. The practice worked in the morning, and by noon, you were back in the fog. This is not a failure of discipline. This is a structural problem. You were trying to use a top-down approach, using the thinking mind to quiet the thinking mind on a problem that lives below the thinking mind. Dr. Robert Lake spent 20 years pursuing exactly this problem from exactly this angle before he changed direction. The shift came, by his own account, from a conversation he had with an audio engineer who had been doing something almost no one in the mainstream neuroscience community was paying attention to. The engineer had been experimenting with what is called brain entrainment. The principle is straightforward, even if the implications are extraordinary. When the brain is exposed to a specific auditory stimulus, a sound presented at a precise frequency, the brain does not analyze the sound. It does not think about it. It simply follows it. The brain entrains to the frequency of the stimulus. This is not a metaphor. This is measurable on an EEG. You can watch it happen in real time. What this means, in practical terms, is that you do not have to convince your brain to produce gamma. You do not have to sit in perfect stillness for years waiting for it to arrive. You can give the brain an external signal, and the brain will follow it to where you need it to go. This is mechanically different from every other method in the self-development and spiritual growth space. Not better in the sense of being more sophisticated or more spiritual. Better in the sense that it works on a different level of the system entirely. The top-down approach, which is what almost everything else uses, requires the brain to change itself, using its own resources, from within its own current state. The entrainment approach operates from the outside in, bypassing the very patterns that are keeping the brain stuck. It is the difference between trying to pull yourself out of quicksand and having someone throw you a rope from solid ground. Let me tell you about a man named Marcus, 51 years old. He had spent nearly 2 years out of work after his company downsized. Not because he lacked skill or experience by any objective measure. He was more qualified than most of the people interviewing him. But he described walking into those interviews and feeling like the person who showed up was a diminished version of himself. The words would not come the way they used to. The clarity that had made him sharp and decisive was replaced by a kind of fog that he could not push through regardless of how much he prepared. He said, "I knew what I wanted to say. I could feel it somewhere in there. But by the time it reached my mouth, something had gotten lost in translation." What had gotten lost was gamma. 11 days after he began using the audio protocol that Dr. Lake had developed, he received the first job offer he had received in 2 years. The position was better than the one he had lost. But what he said about it, the part that stayed with me, was not about the job. He said, "The change was not in my resume. The change was in my head. I walked into that room feeling like myself again, like the version of myself that I thought was gone. He is not an anomaly. Across the community of people who have used this protocol, more than 18,000 people, the pattern repeats. The return is not always a job offer. Sometimes it is a decision that had been stuck for years, made in a single morning. Sometimes it is a relationship repaired not through a dramatic conversation, but through a simple shift in how much of yourself you are actually able to bring to it. Sometimes it is the synchronicities that Sarah from Texas described. After 2 weeks, the feeling that the universe had started speaking a language she understood again. And in the background of these stories, sometimes without the people themselves realizing it, other pieces of Dr. Lake's research begin to surface in their experience. People who had begun with the Gamma protocol would occasionally mention, months later, encounters with the broader system. He had built references to neuroactive states, to the practices that had taken them further than the first step. But every single one of them, without exception, said the same thing about where it started. It started with 7 minutes. This is the part where I could tell you that what Dr. Robert Lake created is something you need to go find, go search for, go spend time and money tracking down through the usual channels. I am not going to tell you that, because the truth of the situation is closer and simpler than that. But before I get to that, I need to say something about where you are right now, because this moment, right here, is not a coincidence. You did not end up watching this video because the algorithm happened to serve it to you, and you had nothing better to do. People who have nothing better to do not stay through a video like this. They leave in the first 2 minutes. You are still here because something in you recognized something. Something in you knew that the conversation this video is having is a conversation you have needed to have for a long time. That recognition, that pull towards something that you cannot fully explain but cannot fully dismiss, that is Gamma reaching up from wherever it has been waiting. And I want to ask you something that I want you to sit with honestly, not as a rhetorical question but as an actual inquiry into your own experience. How much longer are you willing to live below the level of what you can feel is possible for you? Not in a self-critical way, not as an indictment of anything you have or have not done, but as a genuine question about time. Because every day that Gamma stays dormant is not a neutral day. It is a day in which the decisions that could have been made with clarity get made with fog. The connections that could have felt alive feel routine. The intuitions that could have pointed you somewhere extraordinary get drowned out by static. The spike happened, the signal is there. The question is whether it gets accessed. There is a woman named Jennifer, 38 years old. She had spent years, real money, real dedication, pursuing every legitimate avenue she could find for the kind of transformation she was looking for. Meditation retreats, energy work, every serious practice that came with credible teachers and real communities. And she would come close. She could feel the edge of something during the retreat, in the room, in the presence of the practice. And then she would go home, and it would fade. She said, I was starting to think the problem was me, that I was somehow unable to hold on to what other people seemed to be able to hold on to. That maybe I was not built for this. She was built for it. She just needed a different kind of rope. 2 weeks after beginning the Gamma protocol, she described her experience with one word: synchronicities. The feeling that the universe had resumed a conversation it had started with her a long time ago. Not in a vague, wishful sense, in a specific, daily, undeniable sense. That is what reactivated Gamma feels like when it is actually running. And now, I need to tell you exactly what the protocol is, how to access it, and why this specific version, the version that Dr. Lake made available outside of the clinical setting, is the only version that contains the actual entrainment technology. Because there is something important you need to know before you go looking for this anywhere else. What Dr. Robert Lake created is called the Genius Song. It is a 7-minute audio track designed to be listened to through headphones. That is the entire practice. You sit down, you put on your headphones, you close your eyes, and you listen for 7 minutes. You do not need to meditate. You do not need to hold a particular mental state. You do not need to believe that it will work. The mechanism operates at the level of brainwave frequency, not belief. Your brain does not need your permission to entrain to the signal. It simply does. The technology embedded in the audio uses a specific form of brain entrainment that drives the brain directly toward 40 Hz gamma activity, the same frequency that was running your childhood, the same frequency that MIT and Princeton and Stanford have spent decades studying, the same frequency that Dr. Lake has spent 34 years learning how to reliably restore. This is not a meditation soundtrack. It is not a relaxation tool. It is not the kind of ambient audio that is easy to find in abundance and does nothing measurable to your brain. It is a precision instrument for a specific neurological outcome. The difference matters, and I will explain why in a moment. Now, the standard pathways for accessing genuine gamma entrainment technology are not accessible to most people in practical terms. Clinical neurofeedback, the biofeedback therapy used in research settings, costs approximately $300 per hour. A personal use neurofeedback device that delivers meaningful results costs in the range of $7,000. And the traditional contemplative paths that build toward gamma states the serious meditation lineages. The deep practice traditions require a daily commitment measured in years, not weeks. Dr. Lake compressed 34 years of research into a 7-minute audio file. The original access price for the Genius Song was $49. $49 for the technology equivalent of years of practice and thousands of dollars of clinical equipment delivered directly to your brain in the time it takes to drink a cup of coffee. For the people watching this video, specifically, not for the general public, not on Amazon, not anywhere you could find it through a search doctor. Lake made a decision that is consistent with the reason he chose to release this outside of the clinical setting in the first place. He did not build this to serve the people who could already afford $7,000 devices. He built it to reach the people who have been doing everything right and still cannot access what they know is in them. For this video, the price is $39. Not as a promotional discount, as a deliberate decision about who this reaches and why. And with the Genius Song, Dr. Lake also made available 4 additional resources at no extra cost. The first is the Genius Child audio track, the same entrainment technology adapted for younger brains, for the parents and caregivers among you who are watching their children lose the gamma signal in real time and want to give them something before the decline effect takes full hold. The second is the original book, that the film The Secret drew its core ideas from, not the watered-down version that became a cultural phenomenon, but the source material, the one that deals with financial and practical reality in a way that the derivative work never quite achieved. It sells for $20 elsewhere. It is included here at no cost. The third is a guided visualization that walks you through the 4 areas of life where people most consistently want transformation: finances, relationships, health, and what I can only describe as the quality of being alive day to day. It is not a vision board exercise. It is a structured, science-adjacent approach to setting the direction of a gamma-activated brain. The fourth is an infographic summarizing the 5 most consistently effective practices for maintaining and building on the results that the Genius Song initiates. Print it out. Put it somewhere you will see it. The total value of what I just described, if you were to acquire the entrainment technology through clinical channels, purchase the book at retail, and pay for the guided content separately, is not a number I am going to exaggerate for effect. You already know what the clinical technology costs. You can do the math. What I need to address now is more important than the price. There are products currently circulating online that use the name Genius Song or variations of it that have nothing to do with Dr. Lake's research. They are regular audio files, ambient sound, music with frequency labels, tracks that claim to produce gamma effects but contain no actual entrainment technology. They will not hurt you, but they will also not do what you came here for. The gamma entrainment technology is not present in them, because that technology requires specific engineering that is not present in standard audio production. The only place to access the Genius song with the actual entrainment technology intact, along with the 4 bonus resources and the full money-back guarantee, is through the link in the description of this video and in the project. Pinned comment below. Not on Amazon, not on Spotify, not through a search. If you find something with a similar name anywhere else, that is not what Dr. Lake built. Please do not spend money on a copy of something that does not contain what you are actually looking for. The link in the description and the pinned comment below takes you directly to the legitimate access point. And I want to say this clearly, because it matters. If you get the Genius song and you do not feel different, you do not notice anything within the first uses, you do not experience any shift in mental clarity or in the quality of your experience, you get your money back. All of it. No conditions. Dr. Lake has structured it this way because the protocol works, and he knows it works. And the only thing standing between someone and that result is not trying it. The only risk in this situation is not taking the step. The link is in the description below and in the pinned comment. You will recognize it because it will be clearly marked. Go there directly. Do not search. Find the link in this video. There is one last thing I want to say before this video ends, and it is the thing that I have been building toward since the first sentence. You took a test that you did not know you were taking. You took it under conditions that were not fair, without preparation, without a clear sense of what was being measured, without anyone telling you that the score would matter or that anyone was watching. And you passed, not because you were the strongest person in the room, not because you suffered the most or sacrificed the most or wanted it the most, but because something in you, some frequency that the modern world tried to silence and could not fully silence, held. That is the signature. That is what neuroscientists see in the EEG data of people who make it through. That is what the ancient traditions were pointing at when they talked about the ones who were chosen not by their perfection, but by their persistence. The question that remains, the only question that remains, is what you do with what is still in you. There are people who walked into this moment with everything Marcus walked in with, and everything Sarah walked in with, and everything Jennifer walked in with, and they took the step, and their lives began to show them, in the days and weeks that followed, what a brain running on gamma actually feels like from the inside, what it feels like when the signal comes back, when the static quiets, when the intuition that you remember from your childhood shows up in your adult life with something to say. And somewhere beyond where those people are now, there is a version of this journey that goes further than any single step can reach. People who have gone deep into this work sometimes surface with a sense of something they can only describe as an embrace, not of a person, but of something larger, something that feels like it has always been there, waiting for the frequency to come back on. There is a word for that kind of arrival, and it belongs to the part of the journey that starts after today, not before it. But today starts here, with 7 minutes. The future version of you, the one who is running on the frequency you were born with, who is making decisions from clarity instead of fog, who is experiencing the synchronicities that Jennifer described, and the sharpness that Marcus recovered, and the connection that other people thought they had lost. That version is looking back at this exact moment, and the question they are asking from where they stand is not whether you were ready. They already know you were ready. They are asking whether you took the step. The link is in the description and in the pinned comment below. You passed the test. Now go collect what you earned. But I want to stay with you for a little longer, because there is something that did not get fully said yet. Something that the people who needed this most have spent years trying to articulate and never quite found the words for. And I think you deserve to have those words. There is a particular kind of exhaustion that does not come from working too hard or sleeping too little. It does not respond to rest. It does not go away on vacation. You can take a week off, go somewhere beautiful, do everything that is supposed to restore a person, and come back to find it exactly where you left it. This exhaustion is cognitive. It is the exhaustion of a brain that has been running on the wrong frequency for so long that it has forgotten what it feels like to run correctly. People describe it in different ways. A kind of fog that sits behind the eyes. A delay between thought and expression, as if the signal is traveling through something dense before it arrives. Decisions that should be simple, requiring more effort than they should. The sense of reaching for a word, or an idea, or a feeling, and finding it just slightly out of reach, again and again, across years. You probably have your own description for it. Some version of that experience that is specific to your life, your days, your relationship with your own mind. I want to tell you what that actually is. Not as a metaphor, as a mechanism. When the brain is chronically operating below its natural gamma frequency, the prefrontal cortex, the region associated with decision-making, pattern recognition, creative synthesis, and what we loosely call wisdom, is functionally under-resourced. It is receiving less of the high-frequency integration signal it was designed to run on, and compensating by working harder with less. The result is not stupidity. The result is effort. Everything that should be effortless requires effort. And effort, sustained indefinitely, becomes the fog. This is not a character flaw. This is not laziness or lack of discipline, or insufficient desire for a better life. This is what happens to a system operating on inadequate fuel. And the reason it is particularly acute in people who were once operating at a higher level is simple. The brain remembers, not consciously, not in the way you remember a name or a face, but somewhere below the threshold of conscious thought, the brain retains the architecture of what it was capable of. It knows that the current state is not the designed state, and that knowing that persistent, unresolvable gap between memory and present experience is a significant part of what the exhaustion feels like. It is the brain trying to run a program on a processor that is no longer configured for it. The program is still there. The capacity is still there. What is missing is the frequency. Now let me tell you something about what happens when the frequency comes back. Not from a theoretical standpoint. From the accounts of people who experienced it after spending years in exactly the state I just described. The first thing most people notice is not a dramatic shift. It is a subtlety. A moment, maybe in the second or third day, where a thought arrives clearly. Not a profound thought necessarily, just a clear one. A thought that arrives without the usual effort, without having to push through something dense to reach it. That clarity is gamma. That is what it feels like at the cellular level when the integration signal is running again. And then it builds. The decisions that had been stalling for months begin to move. Not because the external circumstances changed, because the cognitive resource required to make them is now available. The fog does not disappear all at once, but it begins, for the first time in a long time, to thin. People describe it differently depending on what gamma does for them specifically. For someone whose primary deficit was creative, a person who used to generate ideas easily and had gone years without that feeling, the return of gamma feels like something unlocking, like a room in the house that had been closed off, suddenly accessible again. For someone whose deficit was relational, a person who used to be fully present in conversations and had gradually become partially absent, one layer of fog removed from everything they were hearing. The return of gamma feels like actually hearing again. Not hearing with the ears. Hearing with the full attention that makes what someone says land at the depth it was meant to land. And for some people, the return of gamma does something that is harder to describe in clinical language, though researchers have documented it consistently enough that it belongs in this conversation. It makes the world feel responsive again. There is a quality of experience that children have that you had at some point, where the world seems to be in active relationship with you, where things happen that cannot be fully explained by coincidence. where you make a decision based on an intuition that has no rational support and the outcome confirms the intuition, where you need something and, without having done anything to make it happen, the thing arrives. Adults tend to explain these experiences away when they occur, because the dominant cognitive framework of adulthood has no category for them that does not feel superstitious. But the experiences keep happening. They happen to everyone. They simply happen more often and more recognizably to people whose gamma is active. Dr. Lake's research identified this pattern across thousands of subjects. The increase in what he and his colleagues carefully call meaningful coincidence, the technical term is synchronicity, from the psychological literature correlates directly with elevated gamma activity. It is not caused by gamma in the sense of gamma creating external events. It is that gamma-active brains perceive and respond to patterns in their environment that lower frequency brains filter out as noise. The universe has always been speaking. Gamma is the frequency you hear it in. I want to tell you about something that happened to a man named David, 45 years old. He had been married for 19 years, and for the last several of those years, he and his wife had been living in the same house, following the same routines, and gradually becoming strangers to each other. Not through any single dramatic rupture, through the accumulation of small absences, conversations that did not quite land, moments of connection that almost happened and then dissolved before they could take hold. He described it with a precision that I found striking. He said, "I was present in the room, but I was not present in the room. Like watching us from slightly outside, like the channel between us had too much interference." He was not wrong about the interference. He just did not know where it was coming from. His wife had suggested the gamma protocol, not because she had researched it or was invested in the neuroscience, because she had seen it mentioned by someone she trusted, and she thought, why not? They had tried other things. This was 7 minutes. The risk was low. He used it with the skepticism of a person who has already tried other things and knows what disappointment feels like. He did not expect anything specific. He did not try to feel different. He put on the headphones and he listened. The change he noticed first was not internal. It was in a conversation he had with his wife, 3 days in, about something completely ordinary. She said something and he heard it. Not the words, he would have heard the words anyway. He heard the meaning underneath the words, the thing she was actually saying, and he responded to that, not to the surface of what she had said. She stopped and looked at him, and he said something changed in the room at that moment. Not a dramatic reconciliation, just a moment of actual contact after a long time of near contact. That moment was gamma. That is what full frequency integration feels like in a relationship. The difference between processing what someone says and actually receiving it. Over the following weeks, those moments accumulated. They did not fix everything instantly. Real relationships do not work that way, and I would not insult your intelligence by suggesting otherwise. But the channel cleared enough that the two of them could begin to do the actual work of finding each other again. He said the strangest thing about it was how simple it had been. Not easy, the conversations they needed to have were not easy, but the cognitive and emotional resource required to have them was no longer missing. He was present in the room, actually present. That is what this is about. Not about a product, not about 7 minutes of audio as a transaction, about the return of the resource that makes everything else possible. The resource was always yours. It was always in you. It simply needed the frequency to come back on. There is something I have not yet said directly about the nature of the test, and I think it is important enough to say clearly before this conversation ends. The test is not over. I do not mean that as a warning. I mean it as an orientation, because one of the things that happens when people go through difficulty and come out the other side is that they sometimes treat the emergence as the destination. They made it through. The hard part is behind them. Now they can rest, and rest is legitimate. Rest is earned. I am not here to tell you that you need to push harder or want more or be different than you are. But the chosen one, the person the title of this video is speaking to, is not someone whose arc is defined by survival. Survival was part of the test. The larger arc is something else. Think about the stories that the cultures with the longest memories have handed down across generations. The ones about people who were set apart not by birth necessarily, or by obvious advantage, but by something that the world kept trying to extinguish and could not. Joseph, thrown into a pit by his brothers, sold into slavery, imprisoned unjustly, and arriving eventually at a position of such influence that he was able to save the very people who had tried to destroy him. Not because he was the strongest person in the room at any given point, because something in him held. Job, stripped of everything: health, wealth, family, reputation, and maintaining, in the face of friends who told him his suffering was his own fault, maintaining the conversation with something larger. Not in triumph, not in certainty, in stubborn, battered, unresolvable refusal to conclude that the story was over. Moses, who spent 40 years in the wilderness between who he had been and who he was going to become, before he stood at a burning bush and received instructions that would define the rest of his life and the lives of millions after him. These are not stories about perfect people. They are stories about people whose gamma did not die. And here is what I want you to understand about those stories in relation to yours. The difficulty you have been through is not a detour from your purpose. It is not evidence that you were pointed in the wrong direction or that the universe made a mistake with you. The difficulty is the curriculum. The pressure that compressed your signal is the same pressure that, when it releases, produces the spike. You are on the other side of something. That is what passing the test means. The question is not whether there is more ahead. There is always more ahead. The question is whether you show up for what is ahead with the full frequency of who you are, or with the dimmed version that the decline effect installed. That is the choice that is available to you today. And I want to be honest with you about something. I have been careful in this video not to overstate what the genius song is. It is not enlightenment in an audio file. It is not a replacement for the real work of a life, the relationships that require presence and patience and forgiveness, the purposes that require skill and discipline and willingness to fail, the spiritual depth that requires genuine engagement with the unknown. What it is a frequency restoration, a return to the baseline that all of that real work requires, the signal that makes the decisions clearer, the connections deeper, the intuitions more trustworthy, the world more responsive. You cannot build a great structure on a foundation that is vibrating at the wrong frequency. That is not about the structure, that is about the foundation. This is the foundation. 7 minutes a day, every day, not as a replacement for anything, as the ground that everything else is built on. There is a question that comes up consistently among people who have used the Gamma protocol for some time. It is not a question about whether it works. By the time people are asking this question, that part has already been settled in their experience. The question is something more like, why did nobody tell me this was possible? It is a fair question. And the honest answer involves something uncomfortable about how information moves in the modern world. Research that produces a result that challenges the profitability of existing systems does not always travel as freely as the research that confirms what those systems are already selling. The neuroscience of brain entrainment and gamma restoration has been present in the academic literature for decades. It has been replicated, it has been peer-reviewed, it has been confirmed by institutions whose names you know. It has not made it into the mainstream conversation about mental performance, well-being, and human potential. Not because it is fringe, because the implications of a 7-minute, low-cost, self-administered solution to one of the most significant cognitive deficits in modern human experience are not convenient for the industries that profit from that deficit remaining unaddressed. I am not telling you this to make you angry at those industries. I am telling you because understanding this answers the question. It tells you why, in all the time you spent looking for what you were looking for, all the things you tried, all the systems and practices and protocols. This specific approach was not in the conversation you were having. It is in the conversation now, because Dr. Lake made a decision to take it outside the clinical setting, because he concluded that the people who needed this most were not going to find it through the channels that the clinical and commercial systems had built, because the work of 34 years was worth more to him than the revenue structure that keeping it exclusive would have produced. The youthful brain research that preceded the genius song, the decades of tracking what happened to cognition over time when gamma was present and when it was not, all of it pointed to the same conclusion. The technology was the easy part. Getting it to the people who needed it was the harder problem. This video is part of that solution, and the link in the description is the next step. Let me ask you to do something before this video ends. Not something external, something internal. Bring to mind the version of yourself that existed before the decline effect took full hold. Not a specific age necessarily. The version of you that learned things easily, that made intuitive leaps, that felt the world responding, that had not yet concluded that the gap between who you were and who you could be was permanent. Hold that version in your awareness, not with nostalgia, not with grief for the time in between, just as a fact. That version was real. That version is not gone. That version is the frequency that has been waiting. Now bring to mind a decision that has been waiting for clarity. Something you have been circling for weeks or months, unable to land on an answer. Do not try to solve it right now. Just hold it alongside the image of who you were when clarity came easily. Notice what happens in the space between those two things. The version of you that had the resource, the problem that is waiting for that resource. That space, that gap between what you need and what is currently available is not permanent. It is a frequency problem, and frequency problems have frequency solutions. That is what this is. If something in you just confirmed what I said, if there was even a small recognition, a small movement toward the idea that this is real and this is yours, drop a word in the comments below. Any word, whatever arrived in that moment. Not because I need to hear it, because the act of naming something is its own kind of activation. It tells your brain that what just happened was real and worth holding on to. You do not have to. But if the recognition was there, let it land somewhere. I want to spend a moment on something that might seem obvious, but is worth saying directly. The people who get the most from this are not the people who are in the worst situation. They are the people who act when the recognition is fresh. There is a window that opens when something true lands. A window where the recognition is alive and the motivation is present and the step feels close. Most people have had that experience many times with many things. The book they read that changed their thinking for about 3 days. The conversation that shifted something until the usual environment reasserted itself. The insight that was real and is now, honestly, hard to remember in its full force. The window is open right now. It was opened by something in this video that resonated. And whether it was the first minute or the last 10 minutes, the fact that you are still here means something in you has been engaged in a way that is not ordinary. What happens to that engagement in the next 5 minutes determines a great deal about whether it produces anything. I am not telling you to act out of urgency. I am telling you that the biology of decision-making is real, and that the state you are in right now, slightly elevated, slightly activated, the gamma signal reaching up toward the possibility of being heard, is the state in which the next step is closest. The link is in the description and in the pinned comment. $39, 7 minutes. A money-back guarantee that removes every practical risk from the equation. The only thing left is the step. There is one more thing about the test that I want to leave you with. The test was not designed to break you. That is the thing that looks, from the inside, like its purpose, because pressure of that magnitude, sustained over time, produces an experience that is indistinguishable from being under attack. And the natural response to being under attack is to defend, to contract, to survive. But the test was not an attack. It was a calibration. The pressure was measuring something. And what it was measuring was not your weakness. It was the resilience of the signal. The degree to which the thing you were born with, the frequency, the gamma, the God-given capacity that every child arrives with, and most adults surrender the degree to which that could be compressed without going out. And it did not go out. That is the result of the calibration. That is what God, in the framing that this video began with, is responding to. Not with approval, in the sense of a grade, with something closer to recognition. The way you recognize something that has proven itself to be what it claimed to be. You proved it. Now the question is what you do with what you proved. The people who hear this and feel the weight of it, and then go back to their lives without changing anything, they are not failures. They are not choosing wrong. They are simply not yet in the moment where the recognition translates into action. That moment may come. It usually does for people like the ones watching this video. Eventually, the gap between who you are and who you know yourself to be becomes too wide to maintain the story that the gap is acceptable. But if you are in that moment right now, if you are in the moment where the story has already stopped being acceptable and you are ready to close the gap, then everything you need is here. The Genius Song. 7 minutes. Headphones. Daily. The return of the frequency that makes everything else possible. 4 bonuses that expand what the protocol gives you. The Genius Child Track for the young people in your life. The source book that the secret was drawn from and never fully represented. The guided visualization across the 4 dimensions of a life that is actually working. And the 5 practice framework that structures what comes after. A guarantee that makes the financial risk 0. And a link in the description and the pinned comment that takes you directly to the legitimate version, not the copies, not the ambient audio that borrowed the name, not the digital products on other platforms that contain the word but not the technology. The link below this video, that is the only place the real thing lives. You have already passed the hardest test. This one just requires a link and 7 minutes. I want to close by saying something about what happens after. Not after the purchase. After the first week. After the first month. After the gamma has been running again long enough that the changes have moved from noticeable to structural. The people who come back and describe their experience, 18,000 of them, and counting, they do not generally talk about the product. They talk about their lives. They talk about the decisions they were finally able to make, the conversations they were finally able to have, the clarity that allowed them to see something they had been looking directly at for years without being able to see. They talk about their children and the shift in what their children experience when they are in the room with a parent who is actually present. They talk about their work and the difference between producing effort and producing results that come from somewhere deeper than effort. They talk about the quiet, not the silence of absence, but the silence of a mind that is no longer fighting itself, no longer expending its resources on maintaining the gap between what it is and what it was designed to be. And some of them, the ones who have gone furthest, the ones who found their way from the first step to the next, and the one after that, they talk about something they can only gesture at. A sense of inhabiting their life rather than managing it. Of being, for the first time in a long time, actually inside the story, rather than watching it from slightly outside. That is gamma. That is what full frequency living feels like from the inside. You know what that feels like. You felt it once. The fact that you remember it, that you have carried the memory of it through all the years since, as a reference point for what is possible, that memory is not nostalgia. That memory is a map, and the territory it is pointing to is not in your past. It is in the next 7 minutes. The link is below this video. It is in the pinned comment. Find it now, while the signal is strong, while the recognition is fresh, while the version of you that knows this is true is still in the room. You passed the test. The trophy is not at the end of another test. It is in the restoration of what you were always carrying. Go find the link, take the step, and welcome back to the frequency you were born to run on. Everything that comes after this moment starts from that signal coming back on. And if you have made it to the end of this video, if you have been here through all of it, then you already know what that signal is. You have felt it moving through this conversation, reaching up, recognizing itself. Do not let it go quiet again. The link is right below you, in the description, in the pinned comment. You will see it clearly. This is the step. Take it. Chosen one, I need to say something to you before we go any further. The urgency you felt when you saw these dates, April 13th, 14th, 15th, was not fear, that was recognition. Something inside you already knew. Before this message explained anything, before a single word was spoken about what these 3 days carry, there was a part of you that registered them, that paused, that said, "This concerns me." That intelligence, that instinct, is not superstition. It is not anxiety. It is your spirit operating exactly the way it was designed to operate, responding to a signal that was placed in front of you deliberately. You are not here by chance, not today, not in this season. A force far greater than any coincidence moved your attention toward this specific message at this specific moment in your life. And it did so because these 3 days carry something that was prepared for you before you ever knew to. Ask for it. There are chosen ones right now who are standing at the edge of the longest waiting season of their lives. The preparation is complete. The formation is finished. The character that had to be built in the hidden place has been built. And April 13th, 14th, and 15th are not the continuation of that season. They are the closing of it. I am not here to frighten you about what you will lose if you miss this. I am here to show you what becomes available when you arrive at a kairos window, an appointed threshold with your eyes fully open. Stay with me, because what God said about these days was never just about the dates. It was always about you. Now, before we go deeper, I want to tell you what this message holds for those who stay until the end. By the time this is over, you will understand exactly what April 13th, 14th, and 15th mean for you specifically, not as calendar events, but as spiritual thresholds. You will receive a 3-day activation framework you can enter immediately. You will hear something spoken over your life at the end of this message that I believe will stay with you long after you leave this space. Do not skip ahead. Everything builds towards something, and what is waiting at the end was placed there for you. Now, I need to teach you something, because until you understand what kind of time these 3 days actually represent, you will not fully grasp why they matter the way they do. In the ancient Greek language, there were 2 words for time. The first word was chronos. Chronos is the time you measure on a clock, the minutes that pass, the hours that stack into days, the years that accumulate whether you notice them or not. Chronos is ordinary. It moves the same for everyone. But the second word was kairos. And kairos is something entirely different. Kairos does not mean a duration of time. It means an appointed moment, a divinely marked window, a crack in the ordinary flow of time where something extraordinary becomes accessible, something that was not accessible the day before and will not be accessible the day after. Ancient teachers described kairos moments as the points where heaven and earth were closest, where what is possible expands beyond what is normal, where a life can shift not because of effort, but because of timing. April 13th, 14th, and 15th are not chronos, they are kairos. And the difference between those 2 words is the difference between walking through a season and walking through a door. Now here is what I need you to understand about kairos windows. They are not rare because God is withholding. They are rare because they require something specific on our side. They require a chosen one who is positioned and aware. A window that is open is not the same as a window that is entered. And the ones who learn to recognize the signs that a kairos moment is approaching do not live the same kind of life as the ones who do not. So let me ask you something. Let me ask you about right now, before April 13th arrives. Because the signs that you are standing at the edge of a kairos window, the signs that your spirit has already been sensing, something is shifting. Those signs are not invisible. They are specific. And I want to name them for you. The first sign is a restlessness that has been building for weeks, possibly for months, without a clear cause. Not sadness, not depression, something more like pressure from the inside, like something that cannot be contained in the shape it has been living in, is beginning to push against the walls. You have tried to explain it to yourself. You have tried to distract yourself from it, but it keeps returning. That restlessness is not a symptom. It is a signal. It is your spirit preparing for movement before your mind has caught up. The second sign is that old environments have begun to feel suffocating. Places that used to feel normal now feel like they no longer fit. Conversations that used to fill you now feel like they drain you. Routines that used to be comfortable now feel like cages. This is not ingratitude. This is not restlessness in the negative sense. This is the natural consequence of outgrowing a season. The caterpillar does not feel comfortable in the cocoon as the transformation completes. That discomfort is not a problem to solve. It is a sign that the emerging is close. The third sign is an unusual sensitivity. You are being moved by things that would not have moved you 6 months ago. A song, a conversation you overhear, a moment of silence that suddenly feels full of something you cannot name. You may have dismissed this as being emotional or overthinking. I want you to hear this clearly. That sensitivity is not weakness. It is a heightened receptivity. Your spirit is tuning itself. It is becoming more attuned to the frequency of what is coming. The fourth sign is that your dreams have changed. They have become more vivid, more directional, as though something is being communicated to you in that space between sleep and waking that does not fully translate into language when you open your eyes, but leaves a residue, a knowing, a weight, a sense of something important that was just within reach. Do not dismiss those dreams. Do not analyze them to death. Simply note them. They are part of the preparation. The fifth sign is a quiet certainty that sits underneath all the fear and all the doubt and all the exhaustion. Not hope, not wishful thinking, something quieter and more grounded than that. A knowing that something is about to change, that this season is not permanent, that something is moving. You may have spent months trying to talk yourself out of that certainty because the evidence around you did not support it. But it has not left. It is still there. That certainty is not delusion. That is your spirit, knowing before your mind does that the kairos is close. If 3 or more of those signs are true for you, you are not in an ordinary season. You are in an approach. You are on the road toward a threshold. And the GPS inside you has been trying to tell you that the destination is near, not in miles, not in chronos, but in kairos. You have been in the recalculating phase. You have taken detours that felt like failure. You have sat in rerouting seasons that felt like punishment. But every recalculation was moving you toward a destination that was set before the journey began. April 13th, 14th, and 15th are where the new route announces itself. They are where the GPS says, you have arrived. And I hear the Spirit of God saying over every chosen one who has reached this message, the recalculating is over. The waiting is not ending because you finally did enough. It is ending because the preparation that was always going to take exactly this long is now complete. You did not earn this window. You were positioned for it. There is a difference, and the difference matters for how you enter it. But here is what I have not told you yet. What these 3 days actually mean, why April 13th carries one kind of weight, April 14th another, and April 15th something that brings it all together. That is the part of this message that changes what you do with those 72 hours. and that is what I am going to show you next. Now I need to talk about what got you here, because a kairos window does not simply appear without reason. It appears at the end of something. It appears when a process that had to unfold in a specific way over a specific amount of time has finally reached its completion. And before I can show you what April 13th through 15th means for your future, I need you to understand what the season before them was building. I need to talk about the wilderness, not as a metaphor, not as a religious concept to float past. I mean the actual season you have been living in, the season that felt like nothing was moving, the season where you prayed and the ceiling felt like it was made of brass, the season where you watched people who seemed less prepared, less faithful, less hungry, then you step into things you had been believing for, and you could not understand why. The season where the silence was so consistent that you began, quietly, in a place you would not say out loud, to wonder if you had been forgotten. I want to be the voice that says to you what that season actually was, because it was not punishment, it was not rejection, it was not evidence that you did something wrong, or that God had moved on, or that you had misunderstood your calling. The wilderness you have been in was the most important classroom you have ever attended, and you were not failing it. You were completing it. Let me tell you what was being built in you during that season that could not have been built anywhere else. The first thing the wilderness builds is a depth of character that comfort cannot manufacture. There are things inside you right now, a groundedness, a gravity, a refusal to collapse under pressure that did not exist 5 years ago. You did not develop those things by reading about them. You developed them by living through seasons that should have broken you but did not. Every time you chose faithfulness when betrayal would have been understandable. Every time you chose silence when defensiveness would have been justified. Every time you chose to stay when leaving would have been easier. Those choices deposited something into you that cannot be transferred. It can only be lived into. And you lived into it. The second thing the wilderness builds is a discernment that cannot be imitated. The things you have been through taught you how to read a room, how to sense when something is off before it announces itself, how to distinguish between what is aligned with your calling and what is simply loud. That discernment is not a personality trait. It is wisdom purchased at a price. And the chosen one who enters a kairos window carrying that discernment does not stumble into the wrong rooms. They know which door is theirs. The third thing the wilderness builds is roots. The depth that was going down during your season of invisibility, the roots that were extending into places no one could see. Those roots are what will hold what is about to rise. A tree that has grown in shelter grows fast and tall and collapses in the first storm. A tree that has grown in difficulty grows slower, extends its roots deeper, and when the storm comes, it does not move. What God was preparing to release through you required a root system that could hold it. The wilderness was the root building. The window is the rising. What felt like abandonment was actually alignment. What felt like delay was actually development. What felt like your prayers being ignored was actually the answer being assembled. What felt like you standing still was actually everything moving underground, in places you could not see, toward a convergence that required the right timing. And the timing is now. I want to tell you about a woman in a story you may have heard, but possibly have never seen through this particular lens. Her name was Esther. And the thing about Esther that most people focus on is the moment, the famous moment when she walked into the king's court uninvited, when she risked everything, when she spoke. That moment is celebrated. That moment is quoted. That moment is held up as the example of courage and calling. But what very few people stop to ask is, what was happening before that moment? Esther spent years in preparation that she did not choose and did not understand. She was in a position that was not glamorous. She was hidden. She was being formed in ways that she had no context for, because the assignment she was being formed for had not yet revealed itself. She did not know what she was being prepared for. She only knew the preparation. And in the middle of that preparation, there was a man named Mordecai who said to her, "Who knows if you have not come to the kingdom for such a time as this, for such a time as this? Not for such a time as 6 months ago, not for such a time as when you first started believing. For this time, this specific, appointed, Kairos time, chosen one, you are Esther in the preparation. You are in the hidden place. You are in the formation that does not look like what it is producing." And April 13th, 14th and 15th are the moment Mordecai is leaning in and saying, "This is the time you were formed for, the time that required everything the wilderness built in you. This is it. And I know you have carried grief alongside this. I would be dishonest if I did not acknowledge that, because the wilderness is not just character formation in the abstract. It is real loss. It is real years. It is real relationships that did not survive the season. It is real versions of yourself that you had to let go of because they no longer fit what you were becoming. It is real moments of sitting with a hope that was taking longer than you thought it should and wondering if holding on was wisdom or delusion. That grief is valid. The years were real. The cost was real. And I am not going to tell you to simply reframe it away as if it did not matter. What I am going to tell you is this: it was not wasted. Not a single day of it. Not a single prayer that felt unanswered. Not a single act of faithfulness that felt unwitnessed. Not a single moment of choosing to stay when everything in you wanted to walk away. Every single day was being counted and invested into a return that is now arriving. It was not wasted. It was deposited. And April 13th, 14th, and 15th are the moment the account begins to pay out. Now there is something I have not fully revealed yet. Something about the science behind what a Kairos window actually does specifically to a chosen one whose brain and spirit have been through the kind of formation you have been through. There is research that explains why this timing is not just spiritual, why it is also neurological, why the preparation you went through did not just change your character, it changed your brain, and why that matters for what becomes possible in those 3 days in a way that most people never understand. There is something about the preparation you went through that most spiritual teachers will not tell you. And the reason they will not tell you is not because they are hiding it. It is because most of them do not know it. It took a neuroscientist 34 years of research to fully document it. And when I understood it, it changed the way I read every waiting season I had ever been through. Here is what the science says. Inside your brain, there is a category of electrical activity called brain waves. Your brain does not operate on a single frequency. It moves between frequencies depending on what you are doing, what you are feeling, what state your nervous system is in. And among all the brainwave frequencies that neuroscientists have identified and measured, there is one that stands entirely apart from the rest. It is called the gamma wave. Gamma is not the frequency of relaxation. It is not the frequency of sleep or of routine thinking. Gamma is the frequency of peak intelligence, of deep intuition, of what researchers at institutions like MIT and Stanford and Harvard have described as the brain operating at its absolute highest capacity. In gamma state, the brain makes connections that it cannot make in any other state, insights that seem to come from nowhere, solutions to problems that had seemed unsolvable, a sense of clarity and flow that feels, to the person experiencing it, almost like something outside of them is speaking into them. Ancient teachers called it divine download. Mystics called it revelation. Neuroscientists call it gamma activation. And what is extraordinary, what changed everything for me when I first understood it, is that they are describing the exact same experience from 2 completely different directions. Now here is what Dr. Robert Lake documented after 34 years of studying this. Every child is born with a brain that runs gamma with extraordinary frequency. Watch a young child in a state of play and deep curiosity, and you are watching a brain that is firing gamma waves almost continuously. The learning is effortless. The creativity is boundless. The intuition is immediate. Everything is connected to everything else. There are no walls between what is felt and what is understood. But then something begins to happen. Around the age of 7, the systems a child is placed into, educational systems, social systems, the accumulated weight of a world that rewards conformity over curiosity, begin to suppress the gamma. The brain learns to operate primarily in lower frequencies. Beta for thinking and analyzing. Alpha for relaxed routine. The gamma, which was always there, begins to go quiet. Dr. Lake called this the decline effect. And it is not dramatic, it is not a single event. It is slow, consistent, and almost invisible, because every other child around you is going through the same thing at the same time. You stop noticing the shift, because the shift becomes the new normal, and the person you become as an adult, brilliant in many ways, capable in many ways, is nonetheless operating at a fraction of the frequency you were born with. Here is why this matters for April 13th. You cannot enter a Kairos window running on a depleted frequency and expect full activation. The window opens. The window is real. But whether you receive the fullness of what the window carries depends on the state your mind and spirit are in when you arrive at the threshold. A radio that is stuck on static cannot receive a signal that is being broadcast with perfect clarity. The problem is not the broadcast. The problem is the receiver. And here is what the wilderness season you just heard about actually did. Beyond the character formation, beyond the discernment, beyond the root building, the pressure and the faithfulness and the choosing to stay aligned through the difficulty, that kind of sustained spiritual intentionality actually begins to reactivate gamma. The brain responds to that kind of deep, quiet, consistent seeking. The frequencies begin to shift. The receiver gets cleaner. And the chosen one, who has been through a genuine formation season, does not arrive at a Kairos window with a depleted signal. They arrive with one that is coming back online. What I want to give you now is a way to enter those 3 days fully prepared. Not striving, not performing, but aligned. Because the difference between a chosen one who walks through April 13th to 15th in awareness and one who walks through it in noise is not about effort. It is about frequency. It is about where your attention is positioned and what state your mind and spirit are in when the window opens. Dr. Lake spent years compressing the most effective methods for gamma reactivation into something accessible. Something that did not require expensive biofeedback equipment machines that cost $7,000 or more. Something that did not require months of intensive practice before results began to show. Something that a person in their ordinary life could use and begin to feel the shift from the very first time. What he created is a 7-minute audio track that uses a specific technology called brain entrainment. The way brain entrainment works is this. Your brain is extraordinarily responsive to sound frequencies. When the audio presents your brain with a precise pattern of sound, the brain begins to synchronize to that pattern, the way a tuning fork will begin to resonate when a matching frequency is struck nearby. Dr. Lake engineered this track to guide your brain gently and precisely into the gamma range. 7 minutes, headphones in, eyes resting, and the frequency begins to shift. He called it the genius song. And I want to be completely honest with you about what it is and what it is not. It is not a miracle product. It is a recalibration tool. It is the most accessible, scientifically grounded method I have encountered for doing what your spirit is already asking your brain to do. Get ready. Come online. Be receptive for what is coming. Among those who went deepest into this kind of preparation, who used it consistently over weeks and months before a significant season, names like Neuroactive began appearing part of a broader ecosystem. Some of the most transformed chosen ones were working with. But today, in this message, what I want to point you toward is the beginning, the first step, the thing Dr. Lake built to open the door. The Genius Song is not sold in stores. It is not on any streaming platform. The only place to receive the original with the complete brain entrainment technology with the 4 additional tools that Dr. Lake includes with it, and with the full money-back guarantee, is through the link in the description and the pinned comment below this message. I have heard from chosen ones who found something with a similar name on other platforms, and what they received was not this. It was audio without the technology, a placeholder without the substance. The original is only in one place. It is the link below. Dr. Lake prices this at $49. For the chosen ones watching this message, he has made it available at $39. No shipping. Delivered instantly to your email. And if you use it and feel nothing different, not after 1 day, not after a week, not after however long you choose to try it, you receive every dollar back. No conditions, no questions. The only risk is not trying it before the window opens. Now, whether or not you receive the Genius song before April 13th, I want to give you something you can use right now. A framework I call the 3-day activation protocol. Because the how of entering those 72 hours matters as much as the knowing that they are significant. The first day, April 13th, is the clearing day. The energy of this day is about what you release, not what you receive. You cannot fill a vessel that is already full of yesterday. On April 13th, what you are doing spiritually is setting down everything that does not belong in what is about to begin. The old story, the old ceiling, the old version of yourself that survived the wilderness but was never meant to stay there. You are not abandoning the past, you are completing it. There is a difference. The second day, April 14th, is the receiving day. And the posture of this day is the most counterintuitive thing I can say to a chosen one who has been in a waiting season. Stop reaching. Stop striving. Stop trying to make something happen. The receiving day is not passive in the sense of disconnected. It is actively open. There is a difference between a hand that is clenched and a hand that is open. The same motion that grasps can also receive. On April 14th, you are practicing the open hand. You are becoming spacious enough for what is moving toward you. The third day, April 15th, is the sealing day. What enters a Kairos window does not automatically stay. It needs to be sealed. On April 15th, you are speaking, you are declaring, you are putting language to what was received and what was released, and you are stating out loud, if possible, in the quiet of your spirit, if not that this is real, this is mine, this is sealed. A declaration is not wishful thinking. It is the act of your will, coming into agreement with what the Spirit has already moved. Before you enter April 13th, I want you to run what I call the frequency audit. Not with a pen and paper, with your full attention, right now, in the space where you are. I am going to ask you 5 questions. You do not have to answer them out loud, but I want you to answer them honestly, in your spirit, as I ask them. The first question is this: where is most of your mental energy going right now? Not where you want it to go. Where is it actually going? Is it going toward what is coming, or is it going toward what has already passed? The second question: when you think about April 13th arriving, what is the first emotion that surfaces? Is it anticipation? Is it doubt? Is it a quiet readiness? Or is it a fear that this, like other moments, will pass without changing anything? The third question: what is the loudest noise in your life right now? Not sound, noise, the distraction, the worry that keeps returning, the conversation that is unresolved. That noise, whatever it is what the clearing day is designed to address. The fourth question: when did you last feel like yourself? Not the self that survived the wilderness, the self that existed before the wait, the self that was curious, light, connected. When did you last feel even a flicker of that? Because that flicker is not a memory. That is a signal. That is the gamma frequency beginning to come back online. And the fifth question: do you believe this window is for you? Not do you hope it is, not do you wish it were. Do you believe it? Because what you are about to step into in the next part of this message is going to require that you begin moving toward a yes on that question, and I want to give you every reason to get there. Now, take a breath and hold the answers to those 5 questions somewhere in the front of your awareness. Because what I am about to show you, the revelation that changes what all of this means, is the part that will make everything you just heard land differently. And it is also the part that will tell you, finally, who you actually are on the other side of everything you have been through. Take a breath. The hardest part is behind us. What I am about to say is the reason this message exists. It is the reason you were brought here before April 13th and not after. It is the center of everything that has been building since you first heard these dates, since you first felt that recognition in your spirit that said, "This concerns me." Here is the mega revelation. Here is the deepest truth. These 3 days are not a prophecy about what God is going to do. They are the announcement of what God has already done. In you, through you, in the hidden season. In the wilderness that felt like abandonment and was actually the most intentional formation process your life has ever undergone. The waiting is not ending because the door is finally opening. The door is opening because the preparation is complete. You did not earn the window. You completed the formation that the window required. And that distinction, the difference between earning and completing, is the difference between a chosen one who enters April 13th striving and a chosen one who enters it receiving. Let me say it more slowly. Every revelation you have heard in this message has been pointing toward this one. The Kairos teaching was pointing here. Appointed times arrive when preparation meets the moment. The wilderness teaching was pointing here. What was being built in you was the prerequisite for what is about to open. The frequency teaching was pointing here. The formation you went through was not just spiritual, it was neurological. It was a recalibration happening at every level. And now all of those rivers are converging in one place. The announcement is this: you are ready. Not almost ready, not nearly there. You are standing at the threshold that was built for you, and the only thing left is the crossing. And I know the voice of doubt. I know it intimately. Because every chosen one who has ever stood at the edge of something real has heard it. That voice that says, "What if this is not for me? What if I am projecting? What if I am one of the ones who always believes and never receives? What if I have hope so many times that the hope itself has become the replacement for the thing I was hoping for?" I want to speak directly to that doubt, not to dismiss it, to honor it, because that doubt is not your enemy. It is the final guardian of the threshold. It shows up at every genuine door because it is doing its job. It is testing whether you are actually ready or whether you are only interested in the idea of readiness. The chosen ones who were not ready did not stay to hear this question. They were gone before this point in the message. The fact that you are still here, that you sat with the wilderness teaching, that you answered the 5 audit questions, that you are still present at this moment, that is not nothing. That is evidence. Your presence is your answer. And I want you to hear this. The fear that you feel right now, if you feel it, the fear that says, what if I step forward and it does not work? What if I enter those 3 days and come out the same? That fear is not a sign that you are not ready. It is a sign that you understand the weight of what you are about to step into. The ones who crashed had no fear because they had no awareness of the weight. Your healthy fear is what proves you are ready. So let me say something directly to you that you may have been waiting to hear for a very long time. You are allowed to receive this. You are not required to earn it first, explain it first, or make yourself smaller in the presence of it first. You are allowed to receive this. You are allowed to believe you were chosen before you fully understand why. You do not have to have your theology perfect. You do not have to have your life in order. You do not have to have figured out every question you have been carrying. You are allowed to believe you were chosen before the clarity arrives. You are allowed to walk through this door without having all the answers. Doors are not opened by people who have finished processing. Doors are opened by people who are willing to move. You are allowed to be in the middle of becoming and still step forward. The formation is complete does not mean you are finished growing. It means you are ready for the next level of what you are growing into. You are allowed to outgrow who you were in order to become who you were always meant to be. The grief of the person who did not make it into this new season, the old version of you who stayed small, who stayed quiet, who stayed compressed, that grief is real. And you are still allowed to leave that version behind. You do not owe that version your future. And you do not owe anyone an apology for becoming who you were always intended to be. Now I want to name you. Not the you that the wilderness produced, though that person is extraordinary. I want to name who you have been all along, the identity that was being revealed, not created, through everything you have been through. You are the seer. You have always seen what others miss, the patterns in situations before they fully form, the truth underneath what people present on the surface, the spiritual reality operating behind the physical reality. You have spent years wondering if what you see is real or if you are imagining things. It is real. You are not imagining. That sight is not a burden. That sight is your assignment. You are the spiritual warrior. You have held ground in seasons that would have devastated most people. Not because you did not feel the impact, you felt all of it. But you did not collapse under it. You stayed. You remained. You refused to abandon your post even when the post felt like it was surrounded. That is not stubbornness. That is the nature of a warrior. That is your calling. You are the pioneer. You go first. You go into the territory before it is mapped, before it is safe, before there is a community waiting on the other side. And the loneliness of that, the cost of being the one who goes before the others are ready, that was not punishment for your calling, that was the shape of your calling. You go first so others can follow. That is who you are. You are the voice. You carry something in the way you speak, the way you write, the way you simply are present in a room that names what others feel but cannot articulate. People leave conversations with you feeling understood in ways they cannot explain. That is not charm. That is a gift. And the season of silence you have been in has not taken that voice away. It has been sharpening it. You are the cycle breaker. What ends with you creates space for something entirely new to begin. The patterns that were handed to you, generational, relational, spiritual, you are the one in whom they stop. Not because you are better than those who came before you, because you were chosen to be the turning point. What ends with you will not continue through you. That is your inheritance. And it is also your gift to what comes after. Now I want you to do something. You do not need to move. You do not need to speak out loud. I want you to do this entirely in the space of your spirit, wherever you are right now. In your mind, I want you to picture yourself standing at a threshold, a door, and this door is open. Light is coming through it, not dramatic, not blinding, but steady, real, like morning light, like the kind of light that has been coming for a long time and has finally found the window. On this side of the door is everything you have been, the wilderness, the waiting, the formation, the years, the cost, all of it real, all of it honored, none of it wasted. On the other side of the door is everything you are about to become. You cannot see all of it yet. That is not a problem. You were not asked to see all of it. You were asked to step through. Now feel the weight of what it means to stand at that door and know not hope, not wish, but know that you earned your place there. That the person standing at that threshold has been prepared for exactly this moment, by exactly the season they came through, for exactly the purpose that is waiting on the other side. This is not a visualization exercise. This is an activation. This is your spirit receiving what your mind is now catching up to. The door is open. You are at the threshold, and you are ready. If something just shifted in you, even a small shift, even a quiet one, I want you to seal it. Drop one word in the comments, just one word for what you are ready to step into. That word is not for me. That word is for you. It is the first declaration of your sealing day. Now, I want to tell you about someone. I am not going to give you their name. What I want you to understand is that the pattern of what happened to them is not unique, but it is specific enough that I believe some of you will recognize it as your own. 9 months ago, this person was at the edge of a complete collapse, not a small setback. A systemic, everything at once, unraveling. Professional, relational. The internal sense of identity that had held them together through previous hard seasons felt like it was finally fracturing. They had been faithful for years, they had done the work, and it was all coming apart anyway. They made a decision that did not look like anything from the outside. They went quiet. Not the quiet of giving up. The quiet of the sacred silence practice, a 40-day period of deep intentional withdrawal from noise, from performance, from the need to be seen or understood or explained. They entered those 40 days with awareness. They used the tools that were available to them to get their frequency into a receiving state. And they waited. On the 38th day, something happened. Not a dramatic sign, a phone call from an organization they had never contacted, offering an engagement that was specific to exactly the thing they had been building in the hidden place. The number attached to that engagement was double what they had lost in the collapse. They did not perform their way through it. They received their way through it. And I want to say about that, April 13th is not about what you do in those 3 days. It is about who you are in those 3 days. The performing is over. The receiving is beginning. There is something further along the path that I will not speak of fully today. Some things are only revealed when you are standing inside the territory they concern. But I want to plant the name of it, the way you plant a seed before the season arrives. Some call it destiny's embrace. It belongs to the part of the journey that begins after the threshold is crossed. Today, we are still at the door. But know that April 13th is not the end of the story. It is the first sentence of the chapter that actually matters. Before this message ends, I am going to speak something over your life that I believe will stay with you long after you leave this space. That is what the closing holds. Stay. Chosen one. Before I speak over you, I want to take a moment to acknowledge what we walked through together in this message. We walked through the kairos, the appointed time that is not measured in minutes but in meaning. We walked through the wilderness, not past it, not around it, but through it, with honesty about what it cost and what it built. We walked through the science of what happens in a spirit and a mind that has been through real formation. And we stood at the mega truth that these 3 days are not a prediction. They are an announcement. The preparation is complete. The threshold is yours. I am grateful for a force greater than every coincidence that assembled the right message and the right moment and the right chosen one in the same space at the same time. That is not ordinary. That is kairos. And now I want to acknowledge something that the source already knows. The source sees what you carried into this season. It sees the weight that no one else has a full picture of, the prayers that felt unanswered, the faithfulness that was witnessed by no one human, the moments you chose alignment when misalignment would have been understandable, when no one was watching, when the only reason to keep going was the quiet knowing that you were supposed to. Every single one of those moments was seen, every single one was counted, and not one of them was wasted. Right now, all across the world, chosen ones are standing at this same threshold. Some are in different time zones. Some are hearing different words from different voices. But the movement is the same. The formation is completing. The window is opening. You are not alone in this. You never were. And you are entering these 3 days as part of a rising that is larger than any single life. Now I want you to release some things.